Welcome back to our next learning unit, which covers project costs and budgets. This is chapter 7, and it consists of two themes, which is project costs and budgets and understanding cash flows. So our first part of our chapter deals with project costs and budgets, and after you've done this part of the chapter, you should know and explain the difference between project cost and the key budgeting concepts, estimate the cost activities, determine work with budgeted cost and time phase baseline budgeting, describe to how to accumulate actual cost, calculate and analyze key project performance measures, and discuss and apply approaches to control the project budget. So let's get going. Estimating cost is a vital element to making sure and controlling your project during the lifespan of the project. First of all, it's important that you keep a tight rein on those costs, especially in terms of the key activities along the project activity path. It's also important that you be able to pull the costs and compare them against your scheduled cost that you would have put in place or your project budget. Some of the elements that incur costs are things like labor, material cost, equipment, facilities, most importantly subcontractors and consultants, and also travel, and you should have a small reserve in place as well. It's important that you cost everything in your project. There shouldn't be any part of your project which you don't know what the cost of that particular activity is. You should be able to allocate a cost to each and every single activity, and each and every single activity should be accounted for. Good practice is that have the person responsible estimate the cost, meaning that if it is a contractor, you can ask them what the cost is, or potentially a team member, they should be able to know how much it's going to cost them to complete a specific activity. Use historical data to inform the current project. When we did the chapter on project closing and understanding that you need to keep careful records of the entire project, this is when you're doing your estimates and when you generate your budget, your project budget, that is the time when you pull your historical documents and you start looking at similar projects that you've done before in order to estimate project costs going forward. Be reasonable and realistic. Estimate near-term activities more accurately, which means that those activities that's in the first half or the first part of the project, make sure that you have a very good understanding of what those costs are. Elaborate other costs as additional information is known. So as the project carries on and as the project sort of develop over time, you'll get a much greater sense of what the activity costs are and all of the hidden costs that you might not have known at the beginning of the project. Figure 7.1 gives you a very good sort of overview of what a project cost is and a costing sheet is. Remember our consumer market study that we've been using right through this entire module as an example of how to estimate, how to plan, and now how to budget. So we got a list of all the activities with the person responsible, the work days that has been allocated to them, as well as the labor rate for each one in terms of what the requirements are, which essentially means that your labor rate, your work days times the labor rate equals your labor cost. There might be some travel cost involved or even material cost. In this case, preparing the mailing label, so there's material cost in terms of stationery cost or printing cost. Printing the questionnaire, there's some additional material cost there. So the only person that requires traveling is in Bali, has a travel cost attached to it. And once you add all of those, the labor cost, material and travel cost, you have a final number which then becomes your project budget. It's important that you aggregate the total budgeted cost for your project. And the best way to do that is you can follow two options, either a top-down or a bottom-up approach. Once you have your work breakdown structure, which is a breakdown of all the activities for your project, You can follow a bottom-up approach, means that you can look at each and every one of your activities and estimate the cost for each one of those. All of those would then roll up through your work breakdown structure and then gives you a project cost. The alternative is that you have a project cost, a total project cost, and you allocate for each one of the different elements, you allocate a project or sub-project cost to each one of those sort of group of activities. So you can tell them that this is your budget, you have to deliver this particular set of activities or this particular artifact or this particular outcome, manage it within that particular budget. That particular department might then come back to you and say this, yes, we can manage it in terms of ultimately the outcome, or they might come back to you and say that, listen, the budget is too little. If some of all the initial estimates exceeds the sponsored budget, then reduce the cost and recalculate. And this is that tension. Remember way back in chapter 1, we talked about the different tensions that a project manager holds. And the tension between the cost, the project budget, and the project outcome is quite an important one, simply because the client might have a certain expectation of a specific outcome, of what the project should look like, of what the artifact should look like, of what the advertising campaign should deliver, or what the bridge should look like, or what the piece of software should do. But then they also have a certain budget that they're constrained by. So that is the budget that you have. And in most cases, there is some variance between the two. So the client might expect a lot more for what the budget can deliver. It is your responsibility as a project manager, as a project management team, to ensure that the client is absolutely aware that the budget that they're providing for the project and what it will deliver ultimately. If you cannot deliver what the client is asking for within the budget, you must point that out right at the beginning before you finalize the project proposal and before you finalize the project schedule. Because if you don't, then again, depending on what the type of cost, what type of contract you're on, you might end up being responsible for the overrun. However, if you have a project which potentially might end up being a high risk project, then you have to ensure that the contract that you negotiate is a cost plus contract, because with a cost plus contract it means that every cost goes towards is for the account of the client, and you then get paid a small project fee attached to the project. And in those high risk situations, in those high risk projects, that is the best contract that you should be negotiating. So let's have a look at, as an example here, the packaging machine project aggregate total budgeted cost, or TBC. So if we look at the network diagram for the packaging machine, there's 3 elements, which is design, build, and install and test of it. Activity 1, 2, and 3, and it takes 4 days, plus 6 days, plus 2 days, which gives you a total of 12 days. Now if we look at the work breakdown structure, we can see that the packaging machine, and then there's 3 elements to it, which is the design, build, and install and test of it. And this is most probably at the first level. There's most probably additional activities that sits underneath the design and the build portion of it. There is a 100,000 Rand project budget, of which 24,000 is for design, 60,000 for the build, and 16,000 is towards the installation and the testing of it. You then have to develop a cumulative budgeted cost. You distribute each of the total budgeted costs, the TBC, over the work package duration and create a time phase budget. Time phase budget, essentially, in simple terms, is just you take your budget and phase it over a period of time. So you either break it up into smaller pieces and allocate the time to it, and it is simply taking a budget and phasing it over a period of time. You calculate the cumulative budgeted costs, CBC, and then provide the baseline against which the actual cost and work performance can be measured. you must have that baseline in place, because if you don't have a measurement criteria, then if you don't have anything to measure it against, a target that you can measure it against, then your measurement is immaterial. Then your measurement means nothing. So let's have a look at the example of the packaging machine and the cumulative budgeted cost. So here's your time phase budget. So it is starting off with week 1 through to week 12, and you have the TBC, total budgeted cost, of 24, 60 and 16. And what you've done is you've just phased it over the period of time in terms of when that money is going to be spent. How much is going to be spent in week 1? In this case, 4,000 in week 2, 3, and then ultimately week 12 should be a cumulative number, which is 100,000 Rand for your budget. And you should also have a breakdown of what is going to be spent each week. So you can have a phased budget table, and you can also have a cumulative graph, which is what I call a snake graph, which essentially just runs as a cumulative number over time. You have to, in the control section in the previous chapter, we talked about control and making sure that all of the actuals and all of the different activities are captured each week. Every time there's a change, all of those activities need to be captured. The same with cost. You have to capture all of the actual cost, collect data regularly for funds actually expended, not versus what was budgeted for, and charge to the work package numbers. And that is why having a work breakdown structure with those work package numbers, you can allocate each and every cost to each specific task. You must also have a very clear understanding of what the committed cost is. Periodically assign a portion of the total cost to actual cost and include costs for items that will be paid for later. And those are your projections. Those are the committed costs that you know will come. You know that those costs will come in next week or the month later or further along in the project. The next step is to continually compare the actual cost to the budgeted cost. Calculate the cumulative actual cost regularly and then compare that to the cumulative budgeted cost. So let's have a look and see what that looks like. So by the end of week 8, as a point in time, this particular project is a 12-week project, which is the packaging machine project. At the end of week 8, we plan to only have spent 64,000, but we actually spent 68,000. So there's a variance of 4,000 difference. Now that's not a good or bad thing. Simply means that there's a variance, and you should be able to explain what that variance is. If you compare the cumulative actual cost CAC with the CBC, or the cumulative budgeted cost, in your little snake diagram or into your cumulative budgeted curve diagram, your cumulative actual cost here in this little dotted line should track very carefully on top of your cumulative budgeted cost. And what this graph is just a visual representation of your cost and how it tracks on a week-to-week basis, in this case for the packaging machine. You must understand the value of the work that is performed. For example, if we look at a very basic example, paint 10 similar rooms, you've got a budgeted cost of 2,000 Rand, and the budget then is 2,000 Rand per room. So a very basic project. You know exactly what needs to be done. You have the cost for it, and you've broken down your cost to a per room budget. At day 5, 1,000 Rand has been spent. Now you've got a total budget of 2,000 Rand, so that means 50% of the budget has already been spent. But only 3 rooms have been painted out of the 10. That means that your earned value, your EV, is 3 rooms, 0.3 times the 2,000, which leaves you with 600 Rand. So you've only earned, in terms of earned value, is only you've only received, in terms of what you've asked for the project to be done, which is 10 rooms, you've only received 600 rands worth of work, earned value, worth of rooms painted. Only 600 rands worth of the rooms painted, which is free in this case, of the 10 rooms that needs to be painted. So essentially what the earned value is just a value put on the amount and the work that has been completed. So the question is, you've expended 400 rand more than the earned value that you've received, and the question is why? Well, in this case, it could be explained simply that you might have had to end up buying all of the paint material cost all up front before you could start painting the rooms. So that could be one explanation. But earned value is a important element to compare and measure how much work has been done and received or valued in value terms versus the amount of money that has been spent. So let's have a look at our packaging machine example, the cumulative percent complete per period, and we'll have a look and we'll see that by week 8, the design is complete, the build is 50% done, and the installation and test is obviously has not started because your machine isn't finished built yet. So if we look at the earned value, the amount in thousands of rands, it's already at 54,000 rand out of a budget of 200, out of a budget of 100,000, apologies, out of a budget of 100,000. So we can now easily track and see that the earned value, the cumulative budgeted cost, on a little snake diagram, the cumulative budgeted cost, so that is the budget that we have in place, the cumulative actual cost, so that is the actual cost that we spend, versus the cumulative earned value, or the CEV. And you'll see there's a clear disconnect between them. We've spent a lot more money, but we've also received a lot more than what we, in terms of rands and cents, in terms of the work that has been completed, we've received more than what we have budgeted for. This is an important element to be able to plot the CBC, or the cumulative budgeted cost, the cumulative actual cost, and the cumulative earned value curves on the same graph. Here I've inserted a graph just to be able to see how you can at a glance be able to see, are we over budget, yes or no? Have we received our cumulative earned value in terms of rands and cents, the work that has been done up to this point? Is it on track? Is it ahead of budget, or is it below the budgeted line? And this is one way of being able to track very quickly and be able to visually illustrate whether the project is within budget, and also whether the work that has been delivered is in line with the amount of money that has been spent up to this point. Looking at the packaging machine example again, you can see that the percentage of the budget that has been spent is 64%. So we spent 64% of the amount of money. That's what we budgeted for as at week 8. And we've received, and we've actually spent 68%. So we spent more than the budget. And we've only received 54% of the work in terms of earned value that has been completed up to this point, which does mean that we over budget and we received less for what we've paid up to this point. So the question is, will the work accelerate, or what do you do at this point? Controlling cost is vitally important as part of your role as a project manager. You need to be able to analyze the cost performance on a regular basis. You need to be able to determine the work packages required, take corrective action, decide specific corrective action that needs to be taken, and revise the project plan accordingly. As part of that control process, it's not just the activities that needs to be checked, be verified, and revised on, it's also the cost structure as well. Evaluate all the negative cost variances, take corrective actions, and absolutely take corrective actions of the near-term activities first and the activities with large cost estimates, because if you get those right most times, then your project will run within budget. And also reduce cost of activities where possible. Because remember, your CBC, your cumulative budgeted cost, is still an estimate. It is based on what you thought at the time when you put your budget in place. That is what you estimated the work packages or the work or the cost is going to be. Some of those estimates are 100% correct because those are subcontracted. The subcontractor gives you a quote. That is what they must invoice you. They cannot invoice you for more than what they quoted for you, because remember, the quote you put into your budget, and that budget you presented to your client. But there might be other unforeseen costs, especially time cost, where people take 2 days instead of the 1 day that you budgeted for, and that is cost. You have to evaluate the trade-off of cost and scope. And again, is that tension between the deliverable and customer satisfaction and customer's expectation versus you managing the cost of the project. Because if you can deliver against a very tight budget, but you can exceed the customer's expectation, that pertains quite well for future work with that particular client.